Imagine a book that delves into the deepest questions of human existence. What is the purpose of life? Why do we work so hard? Is there anything that lasts forever? The book of Ecclesiastes, one of the Bible's most intriguing works, invites readers to reflect on these timeless questions. With a realistic, almost philosophical approach, it blends practical wisdom with brutal honesty about life's frustrations and uncertainties. The journey begins with a striking declaration: vanity of vanities, all is vanity. This serves as the starting point for an author known as the preacher, traditionally identified as King Solomon, but possibly representing a collective narrator or a later sage. His mission: to understand the world under the sun, a recurring phrase throughout the book that refers to human existence within its earthly limitations. Ecclesiastes is distinct from other biblical texts. It does not offer immediate promises of reward or an optimistic outlook on life. Instead, it invites introspection, confrontation with the realities of mortality, and the acceptance that not everything can be understood. The pursuit of meaning in pleasure, work, wisdom, and even justice ultimately leads the preacher to the same conclusion: everything is transient. Despite its seemingly pessimistic tone, Ecclesiastes also provides light and hope. It underscores the importance of enjoying life's small blessings: a good meal, the company of friends, the fruits of daily labor, while acknowledging God's sovereignty as the only eternal element. In this video, we will explore the 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes, divided into 7 sections, diving deep into its themes, reflections, and powerful messages. Together, we will uncover how this text remains relevant today, helping us confront our own existential questions. Prepare for a journey of wisdom, mystery, and transformation. The book of Ecclesiastes begins with profound and impactful words. The opening verse, Ecclesiastes 1:1, introduces the author and establishes his authority. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. This verse often leads readers to associate the preacher with King Solomon, known for his wisdom and great achievements. While this attribution is traditional, some scholars suggest that the author may have been another wise figure, writing later in a different context. Regardless of the author's precise identity, it is clear that he writes as someone deeply contemplating the mysteries of life and human purpose. Ecclesiastes 1:2 presents the central declaration of the book, a phrase echoed throughout its chapters. "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher. "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Here, the word vanity comes from the Hebrew hevel, which means vapor, breath, or something ephemeral and fleeting. This word is repeated 5 times in this single verse, emphasizing the fragility and transience of human existence. From the outset, the preacher lays out his thesis: life is temporary and offers no lasting meaning in and of itself. In the following verse, Ecclesiastes 1:3, the preacher poses a fundamental question that drives his reflection. What profit has man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? This question raises an existential dilemma that resonates with all humanity. What do we truly gain from our incessant efforts? The phrase, "under the sun," used repeatedly throughout the book, symbolizes earthly life, seen from a purely human perspective, without considering eternity or divine intervention. The preacher is probing the intrinsic value of life and human labor in this limited world. From Ecclesiastes 1:4, the preacher begins reflecting on the cycles of nature as a metaphor for the monotony of human existence. He writes, "One generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever." This contrast between humanity's fleeting nature and the earth's apparent permanence highlights the fragility of human life. While entire generations are born and die, the natural world continues, indifferent to individual lives. In verses 5-7, the preacher describes elements of nature in their constant repetition. In Ecclesiastes 1:5 he says, "The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it arose." The daily movement of the sun illustrates the relentless routine and often tiresome nature of life. Then, in Ecclesiastes 1:6, he addresses the winds. The wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. Like the sun, the wind seems to move incessantly without reaching a final destination. Finally, Ecclesiastes 1:7 reflects on rivers. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. The water cycle, eternal and unchanging, mirrors the seemingly purposeless nature of things under the sun. In verse 8, the preacher turns to human experience and its innate dissatisfaction. All things are full of labor, man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. He observes how humans, despite their constant pursuit of something new or exciting, are never completely content. Life seems like an endless search, where the desire for novelty is thwarted by repetition and limitation. Ecclesiastes 1:9 and 1:10 introduce one of the book's most well-known concepts: that which has been is what will be, that which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. And in verse 10, is there anything of which it may be said, "See, this is new, it has already been in ancient times before us"? With these words, the preacher underscores that there is truly nothing new in human experience. Everything we see, do, or create is ultimately a repetition of earlier patterns. In verse 11, the preacher addresses the fleeting nature of memory and impermanence. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. He reminds us that no matter how grand human achievements may be, they are eventually forgotten with the passage of time. Future generations will not remember us, just as we do not recall the generations that came before. This reflection carries a melancholic tone, emphasizing the fragility of fame, work, and even existence. Beginning in Ecclesiastes 1:12, the preacher shares his personal experience as a man who sought wisdom and knowledge. He declares, "I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem," Ecclesiastes 1:12, reaffirming his position of authority and experience. He describes his dedication to seeking answers in Ecclesiastes 1:13, "And I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with." Here, he acknowledges that the quest for life's meaning is a tiring and even frustrating endeavor, yet it is one that God has allowed humans to experience. In verses 14 and 15, the preacher offers his initial conclusion. "I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted." These words convey a sense of hopelessness in the face of humanity's inability to fully correct or control the world. Finally, he reflects on the burden of wisdom in Ecclesiastes 1:16-18. In verse 16, he states, "I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge." However, in verse 17, he recognizes the limitation of this pursuit, "And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind." Ultimately, in verse 18, he concludes, "For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." With this, the preacher concludes the first chapter with a somber and reflective view of life and human effort. The weight of his analysis on the vanity of existence sets the stage for the following chapters, where he continues exploring the meaning of life, delving into different aspects such as pleasure, work, and time. The preacher begins the second chapter by sharing his personal experiences in the search for life's meaning. In Ecclesiastes 2:1, he reveals his decision to explore earthly pleasures. "I said in my heart, 'Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself.' But behold, this also was vanity." The goal of this pursuit was to determine whether momentary satisfaction could provide lasting meaning. However, he quickly concludes, this also was vanity. The word vanity, which appeared in the first chapter, is again used to describe the fleeting and empty nature of this attempt. Starting in Ecclesiastes 2:2, the preacher examines the frivolity of laughter and superficial joy. "I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it?" He realizes that mere amusement does not provide answers to life's deeper questions. This realization leads him to experiment with something more complex. He turns his attention to wine. In Ecclesiastes 2:3, he states, "I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life." Here the preacher demonstrates a conscious effort to explore pleasure while maintaining a rational and critical analysis of his actions. However, he does not limit himself to fleeting pleasures. In Ecclesiastes 2:4, the preacher describes how he dedicated himself to great building projects and material achievements. "I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself." He continues in Ecclesiastes 2:5 and 2:6, saying, "I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees." These descriptions reflect his attempt to find purpose and fulfillment through grand accomplishments and creative manipulation of the natural world. The preacher also recounts how he amassed wealth and possessions in abundance. In Ecclesiastes 2:7 and 2:8, he states, "I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man." Here, the preacher describes a level of prosperity that could be considered the pinnacle of human achievement under the sun. He experienced all the comforts and luxuries available in his time. Yet even after achieving all this, he remains dissatisfied. In Ecclesiastes 2-9, he reflects on his success. "So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me." Despite enjoying all these things, he concludes in Ecclesiastes 2:10, "And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil." He acknowledges that while there was some momentary joy in his accomplishments, they did not bring deeper meaning to life. This reflection leads the preacher to a comprehensive verdict. In Ecclesiastes 2:11, he declares, "Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun." The repetition of vanity and grasping for the wind reinforces the idea that even amidst great wealth and achievements, the essence of life remains fleeting and frustrating. After reflecting on pleasures and accomplishments, the preacher turns his attention to the theme of work. In Ecclesiastes 2:12, he states, "Then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done." This statement reflects a grim realization that, regardless of how extraordinary one's efforts may be, they do not significantly differ from the actions of others who came before. In the following verse, Ecclesiastes 2:13, he acknowledges the Value of wisdom compared to folly? Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. However, in verse 14, he reminds us that both the wise and the foolish share the same fate. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all. This recognition of the inevitability of death, regardless of wisdom or folly, leads him to a bitter conclusion. In Ecclesiastes 2:15 and 2:16, the preacher expresses his frustration with this reality. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me, and why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool. This realization is one of the most striking reflections in Ecclesiastes. Death levels all, regardless of accomplishments or virtues. The preacher then expresses a profound aversion to work in Ecclesiastes 2:17. Therefore, I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. He not only questions the value of hard work, but also laments the fact that the fruits of one's labor are often inherited by another who may be careless or foolish. In Ecclesiastes 2:18-19 he says, Then I hated all my labor, in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. This frustration culminates in a moment of reflection on the purpose of life. In Ecclesiastes 2:24, the preacher offers a temporary conclusion. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also, I saw, was from the hand of God. He acknowledges that, while work and pleasure cannot provide eternal meaning, they are divine gifts to be appreciated while they last. With these words, the preacher concludes chapter 2, not with a definitive solution, but with an invitation to accept that there is beauty in enjoying the small things in life while recognizing God's sovereignty. In the next chapter, he expands on this reflection, exploring the cycles of time and the divine role in the order of the universe. In chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, the preacher delves into one of the book's most renowned themes, the idea that there is a right time for everything. In Ecclesiastes 3:1, he states, To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. This opening introduces a poem that reflects the divine order in human life and how each event occurs at the appropriate moment. The preacher, in his wisdom, recognizes that life's events are not random, but follow an order beyond human comprehension. The poem begins in Ecclesiastes 3:2 with the words, A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. Here he points to the two extremes of life and how even the most mundane activities like planting and harvesting have their appointed times. In Ecclesiastes 3:3 he continues, A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. This acknowledges that life includes both destruction and restoration, each having its role. In the following verses, the preacher addresses the emotional and relational aspects of life. In Ecclesiastes 3:4 he writes, A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. These phrases illustrate that human existence is marked by highs and lows, moments of sorrow and celebration. In Ecclesiastes 3:5 he mentions, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. These images suggest that human relationships, like physical activities, follow cycles of closeness and distance. The poem continues with observations about work, emotions, and decisions. In Ecclesiastes 3:6, he says, "A time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away." This passage reflects the balance between gains and losses in life. In Ecclesiastes 3:7, he writes, "A time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak." Here, the preacher reminds us that there are moments when action is necessary and others when it is better to wait and observe. Finally, in Ecclesiastes 3:8, he concludes, "A time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace." These words encompass the full spectrum of human experiences, from the deepest emotions to external realities such as conflict and harmony. This poem is not merely a poetic depiction of life. It reflects a profound theological truth. The preacher shows that all events, whether good or bad, are part of a greater plan. This insight is reinforced in Ecclesiastes 3:9, where he asks, "What profit has the worker from that in which he labors?" Here, he revisits the futility of human effort, but now within the context of divinely ordained cycles. In Ecclesiastes 3:10, he declares, "I have seen the task which God has given to the sons of men to be occupied with." This statement suggests that life's cycles, though often wearisome or difficult to comprehend, are a means by which God shapes and teaches humanity. In the next verse, Ecclesiastes 3:11, he introduces one of the book's most profound ideas. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Here the preacher reflects on the paradox of human existence. We are capable of perceiving eternity and yearn to understand divine purpose, yet our limited minds cannot fully grasp God's plans. Acknowledging God's sovereignty leads the preacher to a practical conclusion in Ecclesiastes 3:12. "I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives." He realizes that even amid uncertainty, the best humans can do is to enjoy the moments God provides. In Ecclesiastes 3:13, he reinforces this notion, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. The preacher acknowledges that life's simple joys are divine gifts meant to foster gratitude and contentment. However, the preacher does not ignore questions of justice and purpose. In Ecclesiastes 3:14, he writes, "I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him." This statement reflects the perfection of God's works, which human beings cannot alter. He concludes that God ordains everything so that people may learn to revere him. In Ecclesiastes 3:15, he observes, "That which is has already been, and what is to be has already been, and God requires an account of what is past." Here, the preacher reflects on God's sovereignty over time and history, emphasizing that the past, present, and future are all in the Creator's hands. This understanding of divine control gives deeper meaning to life's cycles, even when they seem incomprehensible. From Ecclesiastes 3:16 onward, the preacher addresses the issue of injustice, a problem he frequently witnesses. He says, "Moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there." He recognizes that the world often seems unjust, with evil taking the place of justice. Yet, in Ecclesiastes 3:17, he expresses confidence in divine judgment. "I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every purpose and for every work." This certainty that God will bring all things to judgment reflects his faith in divine sovereignty and justice. In the final verses of the chapter, the preacher contemplates the human condition in comparison to animals. In Ecclesiastes 3:19 he writes, "For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity." He observes that in death, humans and animals share the same fate. In Ecclesiastes 3:20 he affirms, "All go to one place, all are from the dust, and all return to dust." This reflection on mortality levels all creatures and underscores the transience of life. The chapter concludes on a practical note. In Ecclesiastes 3:22 he states, "So I perceived that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him?" The preacher emphasizes that despite life's mysteries and limitations, the best response is to accept God's gifts with gratitude and joy. With this, the preacher prepares to delve deeper in the following chapters into how injustice and oppression affect the search for meaning in life, further exploring the human condition under the sun. Chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes begins with a somber reflection on injustice and human suffering. In Ecclesiastes 4:1, the preacher observes, "Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun, and look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter." He describes a scenario in which the oppressed suffer with no one to defend or comfort them, while the oppressors hold all the power. This vision highlights the reality of a world where injustice often prevails and human suffering is constant. This perception leads the preacher to a troubling conclusion in Ecclesiastes 4:2-3. "Therefore I praise the dead who were already dead more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun." Here he suggests that the dead are in a better state than the living, as they no longer face life's cruelties. Even more, he considers those who have never been born as the most fortunate, for they have not experienced the suffering caused by injustice. This statement reveals the deep impact oppression and evil have on his view of life. The preacher then turns his attention to the theme of work and ambition. In Ecclesiastes 4:4, he reflects, "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." He observes that much of human effort is driven by envy and the desire to surpass others. However, this relentless competition does not lead to true satisfaction, but results only in more vanity and frustration. In the following verse, Ecclesiastes 4:5, he comments on the fool. "Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves." Here the preacher critiques those who, out of laziness, refuse to work and ultimately destroy themselves through idleness. Yet he also acknowledges the need for balance in Ecclesiastes 4:6. "Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind." He suggests that it is better to have less and live in peace than to pursue more and become overwhelmed. From Ecclesiastes 4:7-8, the preacher addresses the issue of loneliness and the search for meaning. He states, "Again I saw something meaningless. Under the sun there was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business." He describes a solitary individual who works incessantly but never pauses to consider the purpose of their efforts. Such a life of work without relationships is portrayed as empty and devoid of meaning. In contrast, the preacher highlights the value of friendship and cooperation in Ecclesiastes 4:9-10. "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up." but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. He celebrates the importance of relationships where people can support each other in times of need. In the following verse, Ecclesiastes 4:11, he adds, "Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone?" This simple metaphor illustrates how the presence of another person brings comfort and security. The reflection on friendship culminates in one of Ecclesiastes' most well-known declarations, found in Ecclesiastes 4:12. "Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." This image of the cord underscores the idea that unity is stronger than isolation. The preacher reminds us that even in a world full of injustice and oppression, mutual support is a source of strength and hope. In chapter 5, the preacher shifts focus to reverence for God and the manner in which we approach Him. In Ecclesiastes 5:1, he warns, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong." He emphasizes the importance of a reverent attitude when approaching God, stressing that listening and obeying are more valuable than offering insincere sacrifices. In Ecclesiastes 5:2, he continues, "Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few." This admonition reflects the seriousness of our relationship with God and the need for caution in making promises to Him. The preacher reinforces this point in Ecclesiastes 5:4-5. "When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it." He warns against making promises to God lightly, reminding us that it is better not to vow at all than to break a promise made to the Lord. From Ecclesiastes 5:10, the preacher discusses the theme of money and its pitfalls. He states, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless." Here he highlights that the insatiable pursuit of wealth never satisfies the human heart. In Ecclesiastes 5:11, he observes, "As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them?" This verse reflects how accumulating possessions often leads to more worries and responsibilities rather than true satisfaction. The preacher also mentions the physical and emotional consequences of pursuing riches. In Ecclesiastes 5:12, he says, "The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich permits them no sleep." This simple yet powerful statement shows how contentment is often found in a simple life rather than in opulence. The chapter concludes with a reflection on the transient nature of wealth. In Ecclesiastes 5:15-16, the preacher states, "Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain, since they toil for the wind?" He reminds us that, in the end, no one takes their possessions with them, and the relentless pursuit of wealth often results in futility. Finally, in Ecclesiastes 5:18-20, the preacher offers a momentary conclusion. "This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot." He acknowledges that, despite the injustices and vanities of life, there is joy in enjoying the simple gifts God provides. In Ecclesiastes chapter 6, the preacher continues his reflections on the frustrations of life, exploring how wealth, power, and longevity fail to guarantee joy or satisfaction. He begins in Ecclesiastes 6:1-2 stating, "There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men, a man to whom God has given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he lacks nothing his soul desires. Yet God does not give him the power to eat of it, but a stranger consumes it. This is vanity, and it is a grievous affliction." Here, the preacher highlights the irony of a life where one accumulates all they desire, yet cannot truly enjoy those possessions. He sees this as one of the great tragedies of human existence. In the next verse, Ecclesiastes 6:3, he presents a striking reflection on life and its meaning. "If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, and indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he." This harsh comparison conveys the idea that living without purpose or satisfaction is worse than never having existed. For the preacher, a life devoid of joy or fulfillment is as empty as the vanity that permeates the book. In Ecclesiastes 6:6, he reinforces this thought. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not enjoyed goodness, do not all go to one place? He underscores the inevitability of death, showing that regardless of wealth or longevity, everyone ends up in the same place. This somber conclusion emphasizes the futility of seeking meaning in temporal things. The remainder of chapter 6 focuses on human desires and the inability to fulfill them. In Ecclesiastes 6:7, he observes, "All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied." He describes how human effort is largely driven by basic desires, yet those desires remain unfulfilled. In Ecclesiastes 6:9, he advises, "Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire." This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Here, the preacher suggests that it is wiser to appreciate what one has than to constantly chase what can never be attained. Chapter 7 marks a shift in tone, presenting a series of proverbs reflecting the practical wisdom the preacher has gained in his quest for understanding. He begins in Ecclesiastes 7:1 with a seemingly counterintuitive statement. "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth." This reflects the value of a good reputation and the idea that the end of life can bring a sense of completion or clarity that the beginning cannot. In Ecclesiastes 7:2 he continues, "Better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart." For the preacher, moments of reflection on mortality are more valuable than celebrations, as they remind us of life's fundamental truths. In Ecclesiastes 7:3 he adds, "Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better." This emphasizes the idea that pain and introspection can lead to personal and spiritual growth. In the following verses, the preacher highlights contrasts. In Ecclesiastes 7:5, he states, "It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools." He values constructive criticism and wise counsel over superficial pleasures. In Ecclesiastes 7:8, he declares, "The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit." This underscores the importance of patience and perseverance over pride and impatience. However, the preacher also acknowledges the limits of earthly wisdom. In Ecclesiastes 7:11-12, he reflects, "Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense as money is a defense, but the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it." He recognizes the value of wisdom, but also admits it is not a definitive solution to all of life's problems. In Ecclesiastes 7:13, he introduces an important reflection on God's sovereignty. Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? The preacher emphasizes that no matter how much humanity seeks control or understanding, some things are beyond human capacity. He continues this thought in Ecclesiastes 7:14. In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider, surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. This highlights the mystery of God's plans and the need to accept both good and bad days as part of his greater purpose. In subsequent verses, the preacher addresses justice. In Ecclesiastes 7:15, he observes, I have seen everything in my days of vanity. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. He acknowledges the apparent injustices of life, where the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. Yet he warns against extremes in Ecclesiastes 7:16-17. Do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? He advises balance, avoiding extremes in righteousness and wisdom that may lead to self-destruction. The preacher concludes chapter 7 with a reflection on human nature. In Ecclesiastes 7:20, he states, Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. This realistic observation highlights human fallibility and the need for humility. In Ecclesiastes 7:29, he offers a significant conclusion. This only have I found. God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. He reflects on how God created humanity with a purpose, but people have deviated, seeking their own ways. In chapter 8 of Ecclesiastes, the preacher begins to reflect on the nature of divine justice and the deceptive appearances of prosperity and suffering in this world. In Ecclesiastes 8:1, he asks, Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. This introduction emphasizes the transformative power of wisdom, but also raises questions about its limitations in the face of life's complexities. He then addresses authority and obedience to human laws in Ecclesiastes 8:2-5. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, What are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. Here he emphasizes the importance of respecting authority, while suggesting that wisdom can help discern the right moments and decisions. However, the preacher acknowledges human limitations in fully understanding God's plans. In Ecclesiastes 8:6-7, he states, For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? This declaration reflects the uncertainty that pervades human life and the inability to predict or control the future. The preacher then turns his attention to the inevitability of death. In Ecclesiastes 8:8, he writes, No one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. This passage emphasizes that death is a universal event, that no one, wise or foolish, righteous or wicked, can escape. The certainty of death thus levels all apparent differences among people. In chapter 9, the preacher deepens his reflection on death as the great equalizer. In Ecclesiastes 9:2, he declares, All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful, As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. He observes that in terms of ultimate fate, there is no distinction among different types of people. All, without exception, are subject to death. This reality leads him to a practical conclusion in Ecclesiastes 9:4. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. He suggests that life itself, no matter how simple or challenging, offers opportunities that death eliminates. In the following verse, Ecclesiastes 9:5, he reflects, "For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten." This statement underscores the irreversible nature of death and reinforces the idea that life should be lived fully while there is still time. The preacher then offers advice that is both practical and profound. In Ecclesiastes 9:7 he says, "Go, eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do." Here, he extols the simplicity of life and encourages people to enjoy daily pleasures, such as a good meal and moments of celebration. In Ecclesiastes 9:8 he continues, "Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil." This image of white garments and oil symbolizes a life lived with purity and gratitude, even amid uncertainties. In Ecclesiastes 9:9, he offers another piece of practical advice. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days, for this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labor under the sun. This exhortation highlights the importance of relationships and love as an essential part of a meaningful life. However, he also reminds readers of the urgency of living with purpose in Ecclesiastes 9:10. "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom." This statement reinforces the necessity of acting while there is life. As death ends all opportunities. In chapter 10, the preacher turns to practical wisdom, offering a series of guidelines for living prudently in an uncertain world. In Ecclesiastes 10:1, he observes, "As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor." He suggests that even small foolish acts can ruin great achievements, highlighting the importance of acting with care. In Ecclesiastes 10:4, he gives advice on dealing with authorities. "If a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest." This practical recommendation reflects the wisdom of maintaining composure in conflicts with powerful individuals. Finally, the preacher concludes the chapter with reflections on work and caution. In Ecclesiastes 10:18, he says, "Because of much laziness, the roof caves in, and through slackness of hands, the house leaks." Here, he warns against negligence, which can lead to disastrous consequences. With this, the preacher reminds us once again that practical wisdom, combined with gratitude for life's small blessings, is the best way to live under the sun. The preacher begins Ecclesiastes chapter 11 with a practical yet profound piece of advice on living with intentionality, even amidst life's uncertainties. In Ecclesiastes 11:1 he says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days." This metaphor encourages people to invest and act generously, trusting that in due time the fruits of their actions will return positively. He reinforces this idea in verse 2. "Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth." This advice reflects the wisdom of diversifying efforts and sharing with others, especially since the future is unpredictable. In the following verses, the preacher continues to highlight human limitations in understanding God's plans and the necessity of acting diligently. In Ecclesiastes 11:4 he observes, "He who observes the wind will not sow, and He who regards the clouds will not reap. Here, he warns against paralysis caused by perfectionism or waiting for ideal conditions. The preacher encourages action despite uncertainty, as the perfect moment never arrives. He emphasizes the complexity of divine plans in Ecclesiastes 11:5. As you do not know the way the wind blows or how the bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. This statement underscores the idea that some mysteries will forever elude us, and wisdom lies in accepting this limitation and acting with confidence. The tone shifts slightly in the chapter's final verses as the preacher turns his focus to youth and the importance of enjoying life's vigor. In Ecclesiastes 11:7-8, he writes, "Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity." He acknowledges that while life is full of beauty, it is also fraught with challenges, and both aspects should be held in balance. In Ecclesiastes 11:9, he exhorts young people to enjoy life with joy. "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment." He encourages the young to live fully, yet reminds them that every choice will be subject to divine judgment. In the next verse, Ecclesiastes 11:10, he advises, "Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity." The preacher recognizes that youth is fleeting and should therefore be lived with purpose and care. Chapter 12 begins with one of the book's most poetic and renowned passages, where the preacher speaks about aging and life's fragility. In Ecclesiastes 12:1, he writes, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, 'I find no pleasure in them.'" He urges readers to seek God while they are young, before old age makes life more difficult and opportunities diminish. In the following verses, the preacher uses a series of metaphors to describe the aging process. In Ecclesiastes 12:2, he says, "Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain." This imagery suggests the gradual decline of vitality and joy, like a sunny day that turns cloudy. In Ecclesiastes 12:3-4, he continues, "In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low." These poetic descriptions illustrate the effects of aging on the body: frailty, loss of teeth, impaired vision, and sensitivity to sound. The poem continues in Ecclesiastes 12:5, where he mentions, "They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets." He depicts the fear and frailty often accompanying old age, culminating in the inevitability of death. The preacher concludes this description in Ecclesiastes 12:6-7 with a reference to mortality. "Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it." These images represent life's fragility and the return of man to his origin, the body to the earth and the spirit to God. After presenting these deep reflections, the preacher reaches the conclusion of the book. In Ecclesiastes 12:8, he repeats the central phrase of the book, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, all is vanity. This reaffirmation of life's fleeting nature prepares the reader for the final message. In Ecclesiastes 12:13-14, he declares, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil." This conclusion emphasizes that the ultimate purpose of life does not lie in temporary things, but in living with reverence for God and obeying his commandments. With these words, the preacher concludes his quest for meaning, highlighting that although life is full of uncertainties and limitations, obedience to and fear of God are the foundations of a truly meaningful life. The book of Ecclesiastes takes us on a profound journey through life's great questions: purpose, transience, and the search for meaning. From beginning to end, the preacher challenges us to face the reality of mortality, cope with the frustrations of existence, and, above all, recognize that the true essence of life lies in fearing God and keeping his commandments. He reminds us that, despite the difficulties, there is beauty in small things: honest work, shared love, and the simplicity of living each day with gratitude. Now that we've delved into this timeless reflection together, how about helping others discover this rich wisdom? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss content like this, and share this video with friends and family. Who knows? The messages from Ecclesiastes might bring a new perspective to someone in need of hope and purpose. Leave a comment sharing what impacted you most in this video and your thoughts on the book of Ecclesiastes. And remember, just as the preacher said, there is a time for everything. So take this moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this transformative message. See you next time.